Welcome to the Dynamic Radiologist Podcast, where we feature leading experts in healthcare. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Brownstein.
Hello, Dr. Stephen Brownstein here. I am the host of the Dynamic Radiologist Podcast. Through this platform, I have the great honor to interview top leaders in health and in business to discuss what they are doing to change the world. Some of the amazing guests I've had include Dr. Jeffrey Kronk, CEO of Spinal Kinetics, Smart Injury Doctors, and Smart Injury Lawyers. Dr. Mike Carberry, CEO of Advanced Medical Integration. Dr. Donald DeFabio and Howard Reese, CEO of the Teledentist. This episode is brought to you by Dynamic Medical Imaging. I started this organization 16 years ago and have experienced consistent growth and opportunity ever since. We have the only phonar upright MRI in central and northern New Jersey. We have had patients consistently coming to our center from over 20 miles away. Over 25% of our patients are either claustrophobic or have failed to have their MRIs completed in a closed unit. They have come here to have their studies performed in a phonar upright open MRI. We have had over 3,000 doctors from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania refer their patients to us. What is really telling, though, is that those same doctors who've referred their family and friends have come here to have their own studies performed. Please check out our testimonial comments and interviews on our website, www.dynamicmedicalimaging.com, and see for yourself what your fellow patients have said about their great experience at Dynamic Medical Imaging. Our second sponsor today is Spinal Kinetics, which I started over 10 years ago. We help medical providers of all specialties evaluate for the presence, location, and severity of spinal ligament injuries. If you do stress radiographs in any format, you can send them to our trained doctors who use our special technology. Spinal Kinetics developed the technology called CRMA, or Computerized Radiographic Mensuration Analysis, which is an advanced X-ray measurement technology to accurately measure the exact abnormal motion problems that occur with spinal ligament injuries. If you have any questions, go to www.thespinalkinetics.com or email us at support@spinalkinetics.com. Well, today I have a great pleasure of interviewing my very close friend, Brett Lavender, known as the Persuasive Lion. Brett has been speaking and communicating with large crowds and groups, individually and small groups, in the art of communication for over 25 years. He is a highly coveted speaker, motivator, presenter, and trainer in the professional event presentation space for decades. Brett is now offering his unique brand of training and performance/communication coaching to our corporate and private sectors. Brett's distinctive approach to personal performance and instinctive behavioral communications focuses heavily on the fundamental component of his practice he calls the lost languages. Brett, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Brownstein. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is awesome.
It's my pleasure. You've been teaching me how to communicate more properly. It's had some effect. There's still ways to go. It doesn't happen overnight.
It's a journey. It's a journey. I always tell people this is like working out or changing your lifestyle in terms of diet. You can't do it for a couple of weeks and expect to be in shape and stay in shape. You have to constantly be paying attention to these things.
So what got you into wanting to be a great communicator and also teach the art of communication?
You know, it was kind of by design. I didn't plan on having to learn these skills. I'm all self-taught, so I'm not accredited by a course or a mentor or a class. I didn't read this stuff in a book. I basically designed this process out of necessity. To make a long story short, I went through a very challenging childhood. Only child. And then before I was 20, I had pretty much lost my entire family. Before I was born, all of my grandparents had already passed away. And then I had one uncle who was my mother's brother, and he passed away when I was just 2 weeks old. And then moving forward, when I was 6, right after my 6th birthday on Halloween night of all nights, my father was found in his car a mile from my home with a bullet through his head. Still to this day, inconclusive as to what that resulted from, whether it was self-inflicted or a homicide. And then moving forward, my mother ended up passing away after my first year in college, right when I was 19 years old. So that was it. I mean, I was literally thrown out into the proverbial jungle as a 19-year-old kid who came from a relatively affluent background. I grew up in a very wealthy area. And as a half Jewish, half Italian kid, traditionally there would be somebody in the surrounding group to step in and say, hey, you're not alone. That wasn't the case for me. And I ended up having to kind of make my way through these, quote, sharky waters. And I realized at a very early age that's why I also resonate with the Persuasive Lion name, because the story of the Lion King really is meaningful for me. I had to go out into the jungle and learn how to communicate with all these different animals. And I realized that, and we can get into a discussion about this in a little bit, but I realized that just because we're all human beings and we're all, quote unquote, created equal, does not mean we're all the same. And I came to realize that just like in the jungle, there are different animals that communicate differently, that come from different backgrounds. And so out of necessity, I started really paying attention to what people responded to and paying attention to their behavior. And being in front of audiences from a very early age, I started using that as a platform to learn what happened when I said this way. What happened when I used my hand gestures that way, or I made a certain facial expression. And it just kind of fell into place. And I realized I was onto something, and I learned how to really deliver this message effectively. And that's what my passion is now. I like the process of watching somebody go through things they might not even realize that they're doing or not doing, and watch them correct that over the course of time.
Well, why do you feel it's so important now more than ever to be able to communicate and not use technology per se, but just, be able to communicate, maybe use technology like we're using now with podcasts, but to be able to communicate, one-to-one and one-to-many?
Well, a fundamental part of my teaching is what I call the lost languages. And the reason I call it the lost languages is because of exactly what you just said. As a result of technology, let's take COVID out of the equation for right now. But even before COVID, technology, in my opinion, was designed to enhance communication and to offer us a convenience to text somebody a quick message and say, hey, I'm downstairs, or I'll be there in 5 minutes. But what happened is, even prior to COVID, technology started replacing effective interpersonal communication skills, to the point where this newer generation doesn't even have the ability to look somebody directly in their eyes in a genuine way and make a connection, because they're constantly looking down at their phone or at their tablet or at their video screen on their computer. And so I do believe when I talk about these lost languages, which is really everything but the words, right? So your facial expressions, your eye contact, your body language, your hand gestures, the thoughts that you think and how they create a reaction in this machine that we have in relationship to the dilation or constriction of your pupils and the pheromones that we give off. And because technology has gotten to a point where it's almost replaced that. I mean, to an extreme, I've literally seen two 20-somethings sitting in a living room together, having a conversation on text, not even talking to each other. Or, families will text from upstairs or downstairs rather than just taking the extra time to get off your butt and go talk to somebody. Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all these dating sites have taken what I consider to be the genuine humanity out of actual interpersonal communications. And I think it's dangerous. I think as it progresses, And as AI becomes more of a thing, like Siri and Alexa, I think we're on a downward spiral. And I do believe it's very important to reignite these lost languages and understand that this is the source of the communication. Now, fast forward to COVID, where you've got kids that were forced to communicate this way through a video screen for over a year. The amount of the lack of socialization, the lack of ability to actually go through the process of learning how to communicate, to me is very dangerous, especially when we're doing this, because there are certain things that, yes, you can cross over communicatively through a video screen, but there are many things that are not crossed over. Case in point, direct eye contact, actual electricity, connectivity between individuals. And so that's why I'm on this mission. Everyone that I speak to comes back to me and says the results that I get from the people that I communicate with, whether it's my friends or my family or my coworkers, my employees, my employers, and ultimately it comes down to how effectively we communicate with ourselves. And I mean, across the board, I get it from every demographic. This stuff is powerful. And that's why I think it's so important in conjunction with technology.
For instance, you look at a street in New York where there's hundreds of people. These people are on their phone looking down. Forget about all the accidents, but all the lost ability to communicate with your fellow humans. Hello, how are you?
Right.
What what problems are you dealing with? Just be able to communicate, be human is lost because we're looking down at our phone. Forget tripping over a sidewalk or being run over by a car. I don't know how many times they walk right in front of you. They don't even know that the car's there.
Right. Well, in a sense, it's kind of self-inflicted sensory deprivation, in my opinion. You're missing what's really happening around in exchange for what's happening virtually. What's more valuable? I mean, yes, is it great and convenient to be connected to technology and see what's going on Facebook and see what's going on in the world, and information is at our fingertips in an instant. And the convenience of I just did a keynote for JP Morgan in Bournemouth, England, and I did it from the convenience and the comfort of my living room. So that to me is the value added with technology. But everything outside of that, and unfortunately, I don't think that there's any fast track to slowing this down. I think it's an organic process that people really do need to start paying attention to how they communicate, because we are becoming really, really dangerously robotic, in my opinion. And I just find it's a much more appealing interaction when I can actually look somebody directly in their eyes, understand how to use this vocal tool that I've been given, understand how to use my hands. When you're talking to someone who's hearing impaired, they speak specifically with these two instruments. That's called sign language. That means it's a language, which means even when you're using it indiscriminately, it's still sending a message. But nobody talks about this. Nobody talks in school about how your vocal melody is going to affect not only the meaning of the things that you're saying, but the way people respond to those things. It's really a very deep rabbit hole to get into.
So, in the past, you did a lot of keynote speaking.
Yeah.
And as a speaker, you would sense the pulse of the audience.
Correct.
The heartbeat of the audience. And even though you may be speaking to one person at a time, you're speaking to a group. So you can kind of sense whether they're getting you or not. And you can change your approach or do something to get them more engaged. And I know one of the things that you've done in the past is call one of the members of the audience up to give them a lesson. So why don't you give our audience, pretend they're in your audience and call someone up to the stage, and in this case it'll be you and me,
right?
Let's talk about Grandpa.
Well, I was just going to say, that's a great opportunity to give a really quick lesson on the potency of vocal melody and how nobody really pays attention to how powerful just a shift in melody can change the meaning of a sentence and who you're talking to and the response that you get from it. So, for example, I have two sentences written here, and I use this in every keynote, every training session. Every client of mine gets to see this because it really does land the importance of this melodic shift. So we have two sentences here, but for the accent marks, anyone reading this would think that they are identical. They're the same sentences and they mean the same exact thing. It's only 3 words. But if I were to ask you to recite the first sentence based on the accent marks, how would you think that would go?
Let's eat grandpa.
No. So watch. So let's eat grandpa. That's 3 words and it's very specific. Let's eat grandpa. Now, that means something pretty specific. When you say that in that tone, number one, who are you talking to?
Grandpa.
You're talking, and only to grandpa, right? Let's eat grandpa. That's a very specific communication. When you say that, there's a thought that triggers in your brain because let's eat grandpa is a positive thing. I'm going to go get to eat with my grandpa. I love my grandpa. So my facial expression is going to show that almost instinctively and uncontrollably. It's very challenging to shift that perspective because it's all being controlled by a thought. And that thought is dictating the melody, and therefore that melody is creating a meaning. Now we go to the second sentence. And that, even though it looks the same, but the accents are different, is going to change the entire meaning of everything right now. And this is why I love doing this with people on stage, because in the moment they can see a shift in how powerful this kind of stuff is. So this second sentence, as opposed to the first one, which was let's eat grandpa, this second sentence says, let's eat grandpa. Now, all I did was change 2 syllables in a 3-word sentence, and I completely shifted the entire meaning. Okay, so first of all, when I say, let's eat grandpa, now who am I talking to?
An audience.
I'm talking to everybody but grandpa. So just by changing the melody, I didn't change any words. I just changed the melody, and it completely just changed who I was talking to. It also is not such a great thought. That means let's eat this guy. Let's eat this old guy, right? And so that thought triggers a completely different reaction in my machine. My facial expression is going to change to accommodate that meaning. Let's eat grandpa, right? My melody changes, my tone changes, the meaning of the sentence changes, who I'm talking to changes. And that is why I'm so adamant about teaching people about the power of vocal melody. And there's a lot more lessons that come along with this, but that's just a great example of how potent this really is.
Oh, absolutely. So we mentioned the lost languages, and there's basically 3 components of that. You want to go over that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I believe that, the words are important too, believe me. When I teach speakers, when I teach communicators how to present in front of an audience, whether it's one-on-one, 1-on-5, 1-on-5,000, the words are important. However, it's a known fact in this universe that people really only respond to about 5% of the words that you're using. Now, over the course of decades of doing this, I have developed this, what I call my proverbial backpack of 1 million words and phrases that come at me at will. So very rarely will you hear me stumble over my words. Very rarely will you hear me go, or because I also have the ability to utilize effective pauses, which is another thing that people don't really understand, because in school, you don't learn that kind of stuff. At home, your parents aren't saying, hey, let me teach you the value of an effective pause and why that's going to give you an opportunity to express yourself more effectively, right? And I also think 5 to 10 words in advance. I paint a picture with the thoughts that I'm thinking, and I'm able to then describe that thought with my words. But as it relates to the lost languages, I really focus on everything other than the words. So meaning everything about this machine has to be in conjunction with everything else in order for the message to be really effectively landed. So it starts off with a thought, and then that thought creates a reaction through your body. But if you're not saying the same thing with this, as you're saying with this, or as you're saying with these, or as you're saying with this, then it gets convoluted. And that's why there's so many communications that get lost in translation. The three fundamental groupings that I use are fundamentals are what I just call your physical self. So persuasive and compelling eye contact, eye contact, eye contact, eye contact. This is one of my first and most important lessons to people, because 99% of the people that I encounter don't really know how to comfortably use effective eye contact. It can be creepy, it can be sexy, it can be aggressive, it can be awkward. There's so many things that the eyes can deliver, but the objective is to land on what I like to call easy eye contact. Just being able to comfortably look into a person versus looking at them. And then I talk about body language and facial expressions and hand gestures and the communication, the conviction and the passion in your communication. And that leads me into vocal techniques, which really is understanding the nature of how to use this instrument. These are vocal cords. They're an instrument. They are designed to make a sound. And a lot of people out there don't understand the nature of how to effectively use this entire unit, meaning diaphragmatic breathing, understanding how to tune and tone your voice for your vocal cords are different than my vocal cords. If we're talking to a 5-foot tiny woman, her vocal cords are different. So you want to find, it's like tuning a guitar. You want to tune this to the effective pitch and tone for your voice so that it comes out as pleasing as possible. And then again, it gets into vocal melody, which is different than verbal. Vocal melody is the actual melody that you are using when you are using animation to convey a message. It's very, very important that people understand that there are certain melodies that just land more effectively than others. And then, like I said, I got into the concept of effective pauses and why that works, not only for the deliverer of the communication, but for the receivers as well. And then, and this is probably the most important category that I get into, you know, I don't really like to consider myself a motivational speaker. I think I'm more of a communications expert, and I help people interact with others more effectively. However, the tail end of this is really teaching you how to interact with yourself more effectively, because communication is not just for me outward, it's for me inward. How I communicate with myself is going to ultimately affect how I deliver whatever message I'm trying to, and that's going to affect how people react to me and respond to me. So I get into positive self-talk, and I have a few little ideas that I came up with of how to deal with anxiety and stress and anger and frustration when you're trying to communicate, especially in a situation where you're nervous, whether that means you're in front of a group, or that means you're aggravated about something, or you're going into a really important sales meeting. You have to be able to control your thoughts in order to be able to control how you deliver your thoughts.
One of the studies that have come out is people retain only 9% of what they hear. And that's, you know, regular language. But if you're trying to communicate something important and complicated, they're going to retain less than that. So it's imperative that you keep their attention, and you can tell them through your voice and your actions what's really important. You know, this is an important fact. You need to listen.
For sure. You know, it's interesting. I heard this a while ago, and it planted in my head, and I couldn't get it out. Speaking to what you just said about retention, about what people actually retain based on your words, you know, people do not recall what you told them. People do not recall what you did to them. People do recall how you made them feel. That is the most potent, powerful line of communication. How are you making people feel? So if you're presenting yourself in a really effective, fully ironed out way, not robotically, but emotionally, passionately, effectively, people are going to respond that much more. You know, I get into a whole conversation about playfulness and silliness and just really controlling the energy that you give off, because that is what people are going to remember. I can't tell you how many times As a speaker, I've been told by recipients in an audience that not only was the content valuable, but it was engaging, it was entertaining, it was exciting. That's not because the communication itself was that much more effective. It was because it was entertaining, it was engaging, it was captivating. And that's completely controllable by going through these processes and learning how to use your machine more effectively. This is a remote control. That's all it is. It's a very high, in fact, the most high-powered remote control. This is just a drone. This is completely within our control as long as we are paying attention to it. And oftentimes we don't even know what we don't know about it.
Oh, absolutely. So Jay Abraham talks, one of his key distinctions is becoming preeminent. And that's, like a maven, a trusted advisor. But again, people buy from people that they trust and like.
Right.
So both things come back to being persuasive in a good way.
Correct.
To be able to communicate. So you build up the trust. You show your empathy through both your voice and your actions. So I feel it's a critical tool that most entrepreneurs, most business people, and most people in general don't have full grasp of that ability to use it properly.
I'll give you one more example, speaking to what you just talked about. You're absolutely right. But, unfortunately, it's almost like when you're driving your car. You can't see something or avoid something that's in what we call your blind spot, right? And so I use this example, which I learned a long time ago, and it really does land for me, not just as it relates to communication skills, but as it relates to life. I think this is truly a diagram for our entire lives. But as it relates to communicating, what you just spoke about, there's this 25% quadrant of our brain that is what I call what we know that we know, right? And there's a laundry list of a million things that we know that we know. I know that I am on a podcast right now with Dr. Stephen Brownstein, right? I know that I know that. So I don't even have to second guess it. And there's a million things that I know that I know. Then there's this other 25%, which is what I call the stuff that we know that we don't know. It's still cognitive, though. It's still something that we're aware of, right? I know that I don't know how to speak Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know how to do open heart surgery, and on and on and on. And then there's this massive zone, the 50%, that I call the blind spots. And this, in my opinion, is what we don't know that we don't know, but we don't even know we don't know it. So if you're not aware that you're communicating in a way that may be off-putting to somebody, if you're not aware that you're making eye contact, that even though they're not saying it, they're thinking this is awkward or this is uncomfortable, or you're shaking your leg when you're talking, or you're doing this the entire time you talk, or you're swaying back and forth, or your voice is annoying. If you don't know that you don't know that you are doing things or not doing things to put somebody off or have them not respond to you the way you'd like, the only way to correct that is to illuminate those blind spots. And oftentimes, how do you do that unless somebody can point them out to you?
That's true. So what has been the most rewarding and challenging aspects of being the great communicator that you are?
I'm really passionate about this because it drives me. For years, I was an entertainer, and I hosted events, and I was on stage in front of hundreds and thousands of people. And it was a really interesting challenge to figure out the equation of how do I get these people to respond the way that I'd like them to? What am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? And for years, it was just about me getting in front of an audience and figuring out when I say something this way, or when I do something that way, or when I ramp the energy up this way, or when I change my voice and drop it into my chest register, am I getting a different response from people? When I look people directly in their eyes and I think a certain thought, am I capable of persuading a reaction from them? But I really do believe, after all the years that I've spent standing up in front of an audience, the most rewarding thing for me, and it comes through in the testimonials on my website, is I really do love the gift of giving this away and having people come back to me and say, I cannot believe how much more effective my relationships are with my friends and my family and with my kids. You know, when you use effective communication skills, there's nothing that gets lost in translation, or at least very little. And to me, that's really rewarding. I think, you know, I know that I can't change the world overnight, but I can influence the circle around me and expand that as much as I can. And one thing leads to another. So if I can have 1,000 people understand that it's going to be more effective if they make really connected eye contact, that's going to bleed out to the next people that they talk to about it. So that's the biggest reward for me. I love doing it. I love helping people like this.
And the biggest challenge or challenges?
I mean, you know, people are resistant. This is a tough process. And when I do a keynote, you know, I talk about certain things, but like I said earlier in the conversation, you can't move mountains overnight. This is a time-intensive process. It's behavioral change. It's behavioral conditioning. It's repetitive. And there's a lot of resistance, especially as we get older, to behavioral changes. And because someone has been doing something the same way their entire lives, not even realizing that it wasn't as effective as it could have been, the biggest challenge is getting people to realize, even though it's a tough, challenging, annoying process, you have to go through it to get to the other side. You know, Michael Jordan, even at the peak of his career, right, was throwing 1,000 free throws after the regular practice because he realized the power of habit and repetitive conditioning. And so I'll give you an example. Most people make the mistake of speaking on what I call the upturn. You and I have gone through this at length. And what I mean by that is they position a lot of the phrases that they communicate as a question. So, for example, when you listen to somebody's outgoing voicemail on their phone, 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear, "Hi, this is Dr. Brownstein, and I can't get to my phone right now, but if you'll please leave your name and number at the sound of the tone, I will get back to you as soon as possible." Now, that's 90% of the outgoing voicemails that I hear, but it's not just about voicemails. When I bring somebody up on stage at a live keynote and I say, okay, just really quickly in front of the audience, and this, by the way, gets exacerbated when people are nervous. They also tend to speed up, which is another challenge. I constantly have to tell people, slow down, uncomfortably slow. But again, nobody realizes this. So the biggest challenge is getting people to buy into this. And then once they do start to pay attention, they realize, oh my God, you know, the correct melody, the most effective melody, I should say, for an outgoing voicemail would be, "Hi, this is Dr. Brownstein, and I can't get to my phone right now, but if you will please leave your name and number at the sound of the tone, I will get back to you as soon as possible." It's just more effective. It's just more convincing. It's more engaging. It's more welcoming. So that would be the biggest challenge, I guess.
So I know that you're developing, I won't call it specialized programs, but more tailored programs to smaller groups.
Correct.
And small, like you mentioned, JP Morgan. So that's investment. But I also know that you're working on developing a module for the medical field. And as a doctor, being able to communicate effectively is critical with my patients, the referring doctors, my staff, myself, and my family. It's critical. So I welcome that aspect of where you're going with that. And I think it's going to be extremely rewarding for the doctors and their practices to get involved. And one of the things that we're going to be launching with you and Jamie is Lunch and Learn, where at lunchtime, medical staff will hear a presentation from you to give them, you know, some simple tools that to make them more effective and more worth more for their employer.
For sure. Listen, a harmonious office space is a way more efficient office space, whether it's how the customer service people answer the phone to how the doctors talk to their office managers, or their office managers talk to their staff, or how the doctors communicate with their patients, which is really paramount importance, because I don't necessarily know whether or not a doctor has a bad attitude or doesn't have the patience to talk to their patients. But realistically, if they're not employing and engaging these techniques, they could be communicating with a patient who's very uneasy, very nervous, and not getting the proper emotional feedback that they want or need, because the communication is just not being delivered efficiently.
In our practice, as I mentioned in the intro, 25% of our patients are claustrophobic or failed other MRI tests because of the feeling of being enclosed. So we have the pulmonary upright MRI, but having that is only part of it. But be able to communicate and allay their anxieties and fears, and it's important to the staff. Everybody communicates with, especially that subset of patients that are really on edge and uneasy, to allay their fears, educate them. But in order to educate, you have to properly communicate. So I think certainly in our practice, it becomes critical distinction, if you will. It's actually a unique selling proposition that our staff is able to communicate properly and allay these subset of patients. And we have patients coming from over 20 miles because they can't find a comfortable place where they can sit, watch TV, and have their MRI done.
Right.
Of the time. And so it behooves us to become better communicators. And I think, doctors in general, they're rushed, because it's a numbers game. They don't have the same amount of time to spend with patients. So their interactions truncated, if you will, or
I was just going to say that because of the quick nature, the quick turnover, patient to patient to patient, that narrow amount of time becomes that much more important in terms of the communication that goes back and forth. And as it relates to doctor-patient interaction, the onus of responsibility really is on the doctor, who's the communicator. The patient just wants to be relieved of their stress, relieved of their fears, relieved of their tension. And that is on that's the responsibility of the physician to come in and communicate effectively, especially when they have to deliver news that might not be so palatable.
And also, I know you go over the ability to properly listen, because it's one thing to speak, but it's probably more important to be able to listen to exactly what the patient's saying. And most patients can't communicate. People will tell you what they can, tell you what they can't, and tell you what they won't. And sometimes the doctor has to drill down to find out what the real reason is why they're coming here. It may be something totally unrelated initially to how they're presenting. So it's utterly critical that doctors be able to communicate effectively, more now than ever before. And also on the flip side is it's so hard to get good help these days, especially in the medical field.
Right.
So one of the things that, through your program to offer these new employees is better skills. And whether they stay with us or not, they'll become more valuable to whoever else employs them down the road, because they'll be able to communicate better. And, it's funny that, Perry Marshall talks about $10 an hour job and $10,000 an hour job. And usually the front staff are closer to a $10 an hour job. But if they don't listen properly and be able to communicate, that $800, $1,000 MRI that we lose, now that was $1,000 an hour, not even $1,000 an hour. That could be in 3 minutes. So that's, $20,000 an hour job that just got done because of failure to communicate.
Right.
So, again, it's critical, and I can't impress more on doctors and professionals that, personally, you have to learn how to communicate better, and more as importantly, your staff and your employees, your partners, be able to communicate, because most of the time, the quote, what we have here is a failure to communicate. and you're leading the charge, and I couldn't be more proud of you to have you as a friend and
Thank you. I feel the
part of
same
my
way.
family, but also as a coach to me and our staff, and look forward to working with you. And the medical module that you put together is pretty awesome. I have it here. Communicating with patients, bedside manner, communicating with office staff, management skills, communicating with peers, colleagues, and industry associates, educating, presenting, and speaking to large and small groups, communicating with friends and family, spouse, children, parents, siblings, etc. And most importantly, being able to communicate with yourself, because it's all about your mindset. Do you have a scarcity mindset? Do you have a growth mindset? And part of growth is being able to communicate better as well, because that's where most growth occurs, is through networking with people, but being able to communicate with that network, so so everybody knows your net worth.
Sure. Speaking to listening skills, especially as it relates to the fast-paced environment of a doctor's office, where oftentimes the front desk is inundated with patient after patient after patient call. The waiting room has 20, 30 people waiting there. The doctors are moving from room to room to room. Good listening skills are a priority, because oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, which is why, as often as I teach people, I'm also teaching and coaching myself. Good listening means you're listening to the person's actual point and letting them complete a thought. But oftentimes what happens is we're already thinking what we want to say as a response to the middle of somebody's sentence. So oftentimes when I get interrupted, I'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did the middle of my sentence interrupt the beginning of yours?" Because you really do, especially in a doctor's office, where understanding the needs of your patient, the needs of your customer, are really, really important. So good listening is a priority. And then in relationship to a cultural shift, whether it's in a doctor's office or an accounting firm or a legal firm, you really want to coach those people as a group. Because yes, they're going to go out into their world and they're going to use these skills to interact with their friends and their family and strangers on the street and customer service reps on the phone and people trying to get a table at a restaurant. But more importantly, as it relates to business, specifically a medical office, teaching a group of people how to interact and communicate with each other more effectively together as a group does ultimately shift the whole thing up, and it changes the cultural direction of an organization, which will ultimately start from the top at that point and bleed down to the bottom. But it will shift the way the front office staff answers the phone. It will shift the way the front office staff encounters and engages with patients that are maybe afraid or nervous or frustrated or impatient. And it will shift the way an office manager manages and interacts with their staff. So I think, I think personally, the demographic that I like to say is this is for humans. I think this type of stuff should be taught in elementary school or junior high school, where kids are now being exposed to different cultures, different backgrounds, different religious, educational, financial backgrounds. How do you learn how to communicate with somebody that comes from a completely different set of values as you? So those basic fundamental communication skills really are of paramount importance to all of this. I think it's where it starts.
Well, people say marketing isn't everything. Marketing is the only thing. So if you look at how the ability to communicate properly can positively affect a business, any business, whether a doctor, whatever, is, if one of the shortcuts or hacks is Google My Business or Google reviews. And part of, whether it's a patient, customer, whatever, part of their impression has to do with how people treated them, how they communicated with them. So a staff or a business where the front people can communicate properly to show empathy, build trust, will be reflected in their Google reviews. So it becomes a marketing tool,
Correct,
like everything else, that influences positively or negatively people's experience and interaction with the business. So,
correct.
as I said, what you teach is not a soft skill. It's the only skill that's needed right now.
I agree.
And so, Brett, how can people get hold of you?
Well, the first thing would be I have a pretty expressive website called www.thepersuasivelion.com. And you can also email me or email my organization at brett@thepersuasivelion.com or info@thepersuasivelion.com. And there's an opportunity on the website to fill out your information where we will send you access to some pretty specific videos, some of which I spoke about today. And then there's options as to how you can hire me as either a keynote speaker, a seminar, group webinar guy, or a one-on-one coaching opportunity.
And for doctors that are listening to this or their staff, we can set up lunch and learn
For sure.
people as we roll it out. And I look forward to working with you and Jamie and
Likewise.
really knocking it out of the park. And I want to express my gratitude to have you in my life, and also
So the exact same way, Dr. D.
Yeah,
I really do.
When a student is ready, the teacher will appear, and you're my teacher. I appreciate it.
Well, you know what? I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship, to be honest with you.
That's kind. That's kind. Okay,
Yes.
my friend. Take care.
Very much. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Dynamic Radiologist Podcast. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.